I am a person who stutters. I am also a sister, a daughter, a friend, a partner, a speaker, a female. However, being a stutterer has been the most defining characteristic of my entire life. And, it's not the physical act of stuttering that's been so encompassing for me. It's how stuttering makes me feel. I feel incredibly ashamed because I, don't sound like other people. I feel insecure because I'm constantly, considering the kinds of things I can and cannot say. And I also feel incredibly powerless because, I feel like I, can't present myself in the capacity that really shows, who I am as a person. However, there have been a couple of really good things about stuttering. It has taught me, how to be a better communicator in a lot of ways, and it has also forced me to be very adaptable to change. And so, these two things, communication and being adaptable to change, have one, big concept in common. And that concept is empathy. And that's the, reason why I'm here to speak to you guys today. So this is me. I'm around 3 years old. I know, I'm adorable. And this is around the age that my parents told me that I began to stutter. But, like being a stutterer, as a toddler, like that's a pretty sort of common thing. A lot of kids who are, like around this age, like have some sort of speech impediment. But, a lot of them, just kind of outgrow it by the time they hit 5 or 6. As you can tell, I am not 5 or 6, and so this is just a thing that, I've had to learn how to deal with. And so, as a stutterer, you kind of figure out how to cope in ways that are not always the healthiest ways. So, me, personally, I use a lot of filler words, and I know it sounds really smart, but it is what it is. I'm also like constantly trying to change words. And then, I kind of came to a point where, I just decided that like I didn't want to talk to people. And so, I kind of took myself out of situations where, I was going to have to, sort of carry a conversation, right? I became incredibly insecure. However, stuttering, it did, teach me how to approach communication in a way that fosters a really strong connection, right? I became an incredibly active listener. And so I was, constantly posing questions to people. I was giving them the stage, right? And so, I became a very strong communicator in, that sense. And then the times, like I did have to speak, I learned how to really, change course incredibly quickly, right? Like a lot of stutterers, like we kind of have sounds and words that we, aren't confident saying. And so in the course of a conversation, I'm constantly thinking, 4, 5, 6, or 7 words ahead, right? Like, how can I say something better? How can I be fluent? So, after spending, all of these years sort of focusing on just, paying attention to people and, being, very insecure, I kind of developed a process of, just not talking as much, right? Like, I wouldn't put myself in situations where, again, I was going to have to, carry a conversation, right? And so after all of these years of being so afraid and so insecure, I decided it was time to face this fear. And so about 5 years ago, I pursued public speaking. And so, I gave my first talk on stuttering. And then after that, I gave a bunch of other talks on, communication and marketing and, things like that. And so people would, come up to me and say, hey, I really loved, how you talked about empathy. And so, I thought I was very curious because, I never actually talked about empathy in any of those talks. However, like that's the message that people received. And so, I decided to just embrace it. And so, now I, have to call myself something because I'm, up here on stage. So I call myself an empathy consultant. I give talks that are based around, communicating with empathy. I have a course on LinkedIn of the same title, Communicating with Empathy. And, I also give talks at, companies and conferences on communication, collaboration, and empathy on teams at work. And so let's, get to talking about the reason why I'm here. Let's talk about empathy. So empathy in corporate settings is incredibly important because, it's going to help companies essentially just make more money, right? How do I know this? A couple of stats. I promise this part is going to be over very soon. This is not fun at all to talk about numbers. 92% of employees believe that empathy is undervalued in their companies, and 90% of employees would be willing to stay at a company a little bit longer if that company empathized with their needs. So what do these numbers mean? They mean that empathy is going to help companies retain top talent. A couple of other numbers. 87% of CEOs feel that a company's financial performance is tied to empathy in the office, and 80% of employees are going to be willing to work longer hours for an empathetic employer. So what do these numbers mean? I mean that empathy is going to make managers and leaders a lot more effective at their jobs. A lot of times, people kind of consider these softer skills things that aren't as valuable, in corporate settings. However, the softer skills are the ones that are going to stay with you for ever and ever. So, I've talked about, why empathy is important. So let's define it. So I speak at a ton of companies and a ton of conferences, and, I've heard two definitions of what empathy is. And so the first one is, the dictionary definition of, understanding and sharing the feelings of people, which, that sounds about right, and sure. The other one I hear, and I hear this one a lot, and people get angry every time they talk about empathy for some reason, and they get, on their high horse, and they have something to say, they have feelings, and then they just go off. They're like, it's that thing you have to do in order to not be an asshole at work. Now, I actually agree with these both 1,000%, especially the second one. However, I don't feel that these two definitions, are very beneficial, right? Like, I don't think that they, give you guys any guidance into, how to, be actively empathetic, right? And the problem is that, these two definitions are nouns. They are intangible. They don't give you any direction. And so, I kind of got to thinking, like, how can I explain, this concept in a way that people can, kind of take this with them, right? And so, I was thinking of a thing to, like, compare it to, right? Like, a thing that, pretty much every single person will hit. However, people can't fully explain. And then I was like, okay, I got it. It's love. Aww. So, brand new love is the coolest feeling in the world. You feel like this is the best person that you will ever meet in your entire life. You can do absolutely anything. You write ridiculously long, obnoxious text messages. Who has time to do this? I don't, but you know what? That guy did. Good for him. And, you like do just really dumb, incredibly dumb things that last forever because you need everybody to know that this person is the most incredible human being in the world. You think they're cool, you think they're the best, and you just want to be with them until the end of time, and this is what the result of that is. But, then time goes on a little bit, and, you, like, those things that, like that person did that were so cute in the beginning are so not cute anymore. And then one day you realize, oh my God, like, this is not just easy. This isn't just a feeling. This is difficult sometimes, all the time. So, after you spend some time with this person, you realize, like, oh shit, like, I need to try, right? Being in love in the beginning is really easy. After a while, it's a choice. So, as a noun, it is an idea. It's an incredible idea. It's the coolest idea. However, it is an intangible thing, right? Love as a verb, however, is a choice, and it's a choice that you have to make every single day. So if we bring this back to empathy, as a noun is an idea. It is a great idea. it is, the best idea. However, it is intangible. Empathy as a verb, however, is a choice. And it's a choice, that you are going to have to make every single day. Now, it's an especially important choice when it comes to, shaping, culture in your companies. And so now, I am going to talk just a little bit about culture. Because, I think there is a lot of value in creating a great culture and, having that culture have the foundation of empathy. So when we view this word work, a lot of us think, like this, right? We think of like a very corporate setting with, cubicles and offices and, those kinds of things. However, as time is going on, we live in an increasingly global culture where a lot of the times now our teams are dispersed, right? They are all over the country, all over the world. And so, like with this global workforce, culture, is a lot more important. And, investing in good culture is incredibly valuable. So let's define culture quickly here. So culture is the shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs that characterize members of an organization and define its nature. Now, so I see this definition and I see two different parts, right? The first one is the, shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs, right? And so, all of these things here and, here are the definitions. I feel like these four things, these four concepts are kind of all circling around the same point. And, like that's the experience that people are having when they are interacting with your company or with you. Now, the other part of the definition of culture is defining its nature. And this is, I feel like, the most important part of culture, because, culture defines you. However, it doesn't define you in the way that you think. So, I called this section of the talk the myth of culture. And, here's why I, kind of call culture a myth. I feel like culture, cannot truly exists without a sense of community. Now, a lot of the times when we're like thinking about community, we think about our, personal spaces, right? Like our neighborhoods, our developments. However, I'm talking about the, communities that we build, like when we go outside of our, homes, right? Like the groups we join, our teams at work, all of those things are communities, right? So, like if you see like these sort of bigger brand names here, all of these are communities, and they like empower their members through education and activities, and they focus on a couple of really big sort of core values and big ideas, right? And those core values, those ideas define these communities and everybody, knows like what those things are. And so, the big things are going to define your community. However, they're also going to define your culture, right? So, if you think about this in terms of, like the corporate setting, those big things have defined companies in, really detrimental ways, right? Like, if you think about a company like Uber, a few people there, they did things consistently, like that really defined how everybody views them as a company, right? Aggressive, misogynistic, all of those like really bad things are also big things, and they define the culture. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have a company like Netflix, where they are known as having a very positive culture, a very open culture, and a free culture, and an inclusive one as well. And so the big things are going to, I am going backwards. Sorry about that. So, the big things are going to define your culture, right? However, the little things are going to create your culture. And it's those, little everyday actions by, every single person in the building, like those things are going to create the culture that is then going to define you, right? And so, those everyday actions have to be rooted in empathy in order to transform the way, your teams communicate as well as collaborate. So, now, like I want to talk about choosing empathy, right? So I personally feel like, every single person out there is going to have their own sort of definition of what empathy is going to mean for them. And so for me, to choose the little things, here is, how people can, show me empathy, and here's how, I can show others it as well. And so, I, call this the empathy mindset, right? And so for me, it's 3 steps. The first one is patience, and then you have perspective, and finally connection. So for me, patience comes down to just pausing, right? A lot of the times, when we are in these very difficult situations, we kind of rush to judgment on things, right? And so, we don't always think about the other person as a person, and we just start talking and saying things that we don't always mean. And so patience for me is taking a deep breath and then remembering, the goal of the conversation, right? Remembering the why. It's very important. The next thing is perspective. Now, for me, perspective, it comes down to getting clarity. That was not on purpose, by the way. That was in the talk the whole time. So, perspective, helps us to focus on understanding. A lot of the times in these difficult situations, like we think that we, can see the entire picture. However, we only know like a very small piece of the puzzle. And so by taking a step back and saying like, okay, like I just need to understand where this person is coming from, before I jump to conclusions, it's going to be a little bit of a better experience. Another way to get perspective is to rephrase what the other person has said. When we are listening to people, we don't, always hear what they said. We hear our opinion of what they said. And so by rephrasing them, we are, eliminating some of the biases that are naturally there. And so finally, connection. And so this, for me, is, speaking with intent. When we are on the offensive, or if we are uncomfortable, or if we just don't feel like ourselves, we kind of speak in a reactionary way. So speaking with intent is being proactive. It's being very measured in our responses, and it sets the stage for all future interactions. And so that's why like I call connection the beginning. And here this just kind of shows that the foundation of this is just patience, right? It's pausing, it's calming down, and it's really just taking a step back. So to close this out, the big ideas that I want you to sort of take with you, are these. Empathy is a verb. It is a choice, and it's a choice that you can make every day, even if it's hard. Culture is going to be the result of community. So, if you focus on creating a solid community, then culture is going to take care of itself. And and empathy mindset is going to really lay the foundation for teams that are going to be incredibly collaborative. Also, it's going to create a positive environment. And so, finally, you are going to fail at this. I fail at this every single day. However, what's important here is that you continue to try, right? Like failure is only failure if you give up completely. So if you keep trying, if you keep practicing empathy, then the people around you are going to be a lot more appreciative, and you are going to, be a positive force on your teams. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. So, what a lovely first talk to start Clarity.
Well, thank you.
And I'm curious, as we think about the application of empathy in our space of design systems, what things come to mind to you in increasing a designer or an engineer's empathy, particularly one that works on a design system and connecting with other people, particularly if there's these themes of autonomy or threatening whatever their job is as they exist today, or as they think about even their own justifiable self-interest and incentives that other people have. What would you say to those designers and engineers to help them increase their empathy in starting those conversations?
So for me, I come back to, just having perspective on things. I feel like, we just assume that we have a very good comprehension of like every single thing like that's going on in people's lives, right? And so if people can just take a step back and say like, okay, like I don't completely understand like what this person has to go through every single day. And then it's a lot simpler to approach, those kinds of situations from a place of just perspective as well as understanding. I don't know if that fully answers.
No, that's great.
Your
And
question.
so starting these conversations can sometimes be threatening to oneself. You have to put yourself out there. I really appreciate that you said, I have to put myself out there and start a conversation. And then, so that makes me think about confidence. And not all of us are outgoing and so on. What would you say to a designer or an engineer or anyone to help them gain confidence to start the conversation?
Okay, I am not outgoing, like at all. And so, I know how challenging it is to, approach these difficult conversations. And I would say, to just go up to the person and just talk to them. I feel like conversations can be a lot simpler if we just kind of calm down before we, are approaching them. And I know that's really hard, right? Like if you're very passionate about something, or if you, are prepared to like go in there and, disagree, it's going to be a lot more difficult to just come from like a place of calm. However, just approaching those conversations, just prepare yourself, right? Like have a couple of notes written down, and then, just go in there just with the goal in mind, right? It's going to get easier to start those more difficult conversations if you continue to, pursue them. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Sure. And in your talk, you evoked this contrast between what we think of as work, this place we go with cubicles and like two plants that are really tall in front of all the cubicles, and then how so many of us have to reach out and create a connection through our digital channels, our devices. And so what would you say to people that are more isolated from that sense, that they don't have a way to physically read and connect with someone, but instead have the screen and the text box and the stream of words that they engage with?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I work almost entirely from home, and so I know how that feels to be like completely disconnected from people, other than things like Slack or texting. I think it's important to to build like very strong relationships any way that you can, right? And so if that means like calling a person instead of emailing them, or going out of your way to like spend time on site, like with your team or with your clients, just building those personal connections, can happen. You just have to really put yourself out there and create them yourselves.
Last night I had the privilege of talking with Dan Mall a little bit about connecting with different designers around an organization and the varying degrees that they're willing to engage with you as this practitioner of design systems. I really liked your quartet of values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs, and particularly with beliefs you talked about trust, faith, and confidence. But if you're a member of an organization that lacks a culture of critique, that lacks the connectivity with designers, and you're not necessarily high-level management to create that culture, what do you do from the bottom up to start to lay the foundation or start to put the seeds to help that culture grow?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I personally believe that culture can come from every single part of the system in place, right? Like leadership, is going to have a much bigger sort of, control in that culture. However, creating a culture is going to come from the bottom up, right? And so, the people, who, aren't towards the top of the pyramid, I feel like they should be able to, go to their managers and, just say like, hey, like I'm doing this project, or, I'm doing this thing, can you tell me, how I can sort of do it better, right? Like, critiques, can be a part of the culture if people really pursue them. So
my last question is, as designers, engineers, and other people working design systems, we can get so mired in the details, the form controls focus state, creating all these different little elements with craft. And a lot of our conversation comes down to collaboration, agreement, consensus with our community of designers or other people within our org. How would you suggest to them that they keep their eye on the ball of empathy with their users? And how do you connect all that work on all those details of all those tiny little parts with the actual experiences that everybody composes together?
yeah, I mean, I feel like the most empathetic products and designers are sort of parts of teams that are very diverse and inclusive. I feel like the perspective piece can only really flourish if your team has people that have a lot of varying perspectives on it, right? And so I feel like companies, they really need to focus on creating, very inclusive teams. And so, the experience of, both creating the product and the, consumer, using the product is going to be a much more empathetic and collaborative, one.
Well, thank you so much. Let's give a big hand for Sharon.
Thank you for having me. And thank you, Gina.